Coming up today on Uncommon Sense, join me as I interview Katherine Kersten, a senior policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. Coming up soon on Uncommon Sense. Welcome to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. I am Grettelyn, your host, and I am so happy to be joined here today by Katherine Kersten. Katherine, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
It's great to have you here. So why don't you just take a little minute, if you don't mind, and help our listeners understand who you are, what you do, and then we can dive into what you do for the Society.
Great. Yes. Well, I have been an observer of American education for about 30 years, in some times as a senior fellow, policy fellow at Center of the American Experiment, focusing on education and culture. I have been a columnist for the Minneapolis Star Tribune and written for a variety of other publications. Also, I've been interested in classical education in particular, really since my college days, because I was a major at the University of Notre Dame in something called the Program of Liberal Studies, which was a 3-year, very in-depth, basically study of the great works of Western civilization. And I found it to be life-transforming. And so I'm particularly interested in what the Chesterton Academies are doing in that respect, because I understand how important it is.
Yeah, and it's amazing that they're getting it in high school. Some things
Absolutely.
that we didn't even get in college.
True.
Yeah, so it's a really beautiful thing. Well, I want to expand on that a little bit. I was looking at your bio some, and Katherine's written for some very prestigious publications, been on some radio shows you would have heard of. So thank you for giving us a little time here. I appreciate that. But let's talk a little bit about, you're on our board for the Chesterton Society. You mentioned the Chesterton Schools Network. Tell me a little bit about why you've chosen to kind of throw your hat behind us and help us out here.
Well, I was actually in the classroom at the founding of the very first Chesterton Academy here in the Minneapolis area, really the first month back in 2008, when I think there were 9 or 10 students in 9th and 10th grade. And I actually did write about the school at that point for the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and I've followed the expansion of the Chesterton schools since then. I've been to almost every gala here in the Twin Cities, and I've just been so incredibly impressed with the kind of education that's being offered, the way that students are being formed in their faith, the kind of moral formation they're getting, the moral transformation. And I think at this point in our history, at this cultural moment, this kind of education is exactly not only what our students, but what our entire nation needs. So I'm really not aware of any other approach to classical education expanding as it is that would rival the Chesterton Schools Network, and I really want to be part of it.
Great. Well, we appreciate you. And I agree. I think it's amazing, not only the quality of the education, but the quality of the formation of the kids who come out of these schools, because you can teach a Satanist all kinds of important things, but if they're not formed in the right way, that's a big problem. So we're trying to take these kids and really form them as good Catholics, as solid leaders, as people who are going to make a big difference, hopefully, in the country, as you say. And they already are. So praise God. Yeah, wonderful. So we also know that you are going to speak for us at the Chesterton Conference in just a couple weeks here. And you're going to talk about education. So tell us a little bit about what that's going to be. Just give us a preview.
Well, the idea is to, I think, help people understand in more detail how important this project is, again, both for the students and their families and for our church and our nation. So I'm going to begin by looking at the moral and cultural environment, the social environment that young people are growing up today in this country. And I'll be talking about the true kind of what's being called a mental health crisis, really an unprecedented mental health crisis, and the reasons for that. How, in fact, our public schools and even many of our private schools are not addressing that in a helpful way, but adding to the angst and the depression that young people and the moral confusion young people face. And then after kind of laying the groundwork that way, explain how different the kind of moral education and academic education that students are getting at Chesterton is, and why. I'm going to be thanking the teachers this is a vocation for them, and the parents, and helping the society members who may often not know much about the schools understand better why this is such an important part of the work of the Society of G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah, that's a very worthwhile thing, I think, too, because we do notice that oftentimes the society members don't know so much about the schools don't know so much about the society. So we're trying to change that.
Yes.
And we're trying to help make that connection a little more, because what's happening in the schools is what Chesterton wrote about. So that's the beauty of it.
It is truly a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. So this will be your second conference, is that correct?
Oh, well, I used to attend the conference and did for quite a number of years when it was held here in the Twin Cities.
Yes.
But haven't traveled for it. And so last year was the first time at the Milwaukee conference, that my husband and I were there, and boy, we had a ball on so many levels, and can't wait. But it'll be 5 minutes from our house this time around in the Twin Cities, so it'll be a little easier.
Perfect. Well, it'll be great to have you both there. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And sort of on that note, I think we'll just take a little second here and go to a quick commercial break for the conference. So stay tuned, and we'll be back very soon.
Hello, Gilbert Keith Chesterton here. Yes, I understand. Thank you very much. Goodbye. I must scurry. Oh, hello. I've just received an important message. The 42nd Annual Chesterton Conference, that's my name, is going to be held in Minneapolis, in the great state of Minnesota, from July 27th to July 29th. I'm so excited. I need an aircraft ticket to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Oh, I'm very excited about this conference, to hear such magnificent speakers as Bishop Robert Barron, Dale Alquist, and Joseph Pierce. They're going to talk about a little book I wrote about St. Francis. Oh, thank you very much, my good man. Cheerio. Oh, and aside from those marvelous speakers, we shall be celebrating the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the Rosary, the Divine Office. It shall be an intellectual and spiritual feast, best this side of heaven. Oh, and we'll also have the afterglow parties. I'm very excited. To reserve your spot, type in Chesterton.org/conference. That's Chesterton, that's me, .org/conference. UncommonSense.org/conference. It's going to be a marvelous time of friends and fellowship. I'm so excited. I'll see you in Minneapolis. Tally-ho! Here we go! Whee!
Welcome back to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. Again, I'm joined here with Katherine Kersten, a senior policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment, which is actually something that I'd love to talk more about because I've looked into the American Experiment, of the American Experiment a little bit. Seems like you guys are doing some great work to help mend what's going on in Minnesota. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, we have been around about 30 years. I was actually instrumental in helping to start the center. And we really want to be a kind of a public information hub to explain to the people of Minnesota and beyond, because we definitely have a national presence and national connections on a host of issues. My particular interest has been the educational and cultural space. So I've been monitoring what's been going on in Minnesota schools and nationally for many years. And most recently, coming off the 2023 legislative session here in Minnesota, I think very few people, both here in Minnesota and around the country, have any real idea of what is happening. I can start by saying that academics is being replaced increasingly by essentially what's become political indoctrination. Minnesota used to be one of the top performing states in the country in reading and math, and at this point, close to half of our students cannot read proficiently or do math proficiently. And if you look at the national level, the National Assessment of Educational Progress tests on history, this time around, only 18% of American students were proficient, and math scores saw, this is nationally now, saw their largest decline ever. So if schools are not teaching academics as a primary focus, what are they doing? Well, just to give you an idea, back in 2017, I began to look into this in my own home school district, which is the district of Edina, which was always one of the very top performing districts in the whole state. So I found, for example, that all 10th graders are now required to take an English course, and it has 4 themes. I talked with one student who told me that he was told by a student teacher that dead white males are boring. And there's not a focus on dead white males. But in this class, which all students must take in the Edina High School, there are 4 themes: colonization, immigration, social construction of race, class, and gender, and humanity in the face of destruction. Very uplifting. Our new social studies standards about to be adopted in rulemaking focus on so-called ethnic studies, basically replacing history. So they essentially leave out, say, the Roman Empire. They basically leave out any details of World War I, World War II, just sort of Western history generally. And instead, they focus on the oppressive, unjust nature of America, and in particular, quote, resistance to it, resistance to our fundamental social and political institutions. So they're doing this in St. Paul now, and some of the materials call on students to abolish prisons. There's a very, very strong anti-law enforcement component to this. Then, of course, on the radical gender ideology front, this is permeating our schools in Minnesota now. So for the last, I don't know how many years, maybe 7 or 8 years, we've had that, what do they call it? It's a survey taken by the Minnesota Department of Education, or offered by the Department of Education and the Department of Health. And it's given to all 9th and 11th grade students in public schools. So if you see this survey as a 9th grader, you will be asked, are you a trans male? Are you a trans female? Are you gender queer? Are you gender neutral? Are you a non-binary person, etc.? Kids are forced to do comprehensive sex education unless their parents opt them out. We now, because of recent law adopted, have to have menstrual products in boys' bathrooms from 5th grade to 12th grade. So this is the kind of thing that is really prompting parents increasingly to reconsider whether they want their children in the public schools at all.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 young children, very young, and one on the way. And my husband and I have decided that there is no way we can send them to public school ever. It doesn't matter what kind of sacrifices we have to make. It doesn't matter if the Catholic schools are academically good or bad. That's where we got to send them for the rest of all time, because things are just going crazy out there.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, and it's so frustrating that it's, especially like you said, right at the beginning of high school, these kids need so much direction. They're at the height of personal confusion and identity confusion just as people, because it's hard at that time, at that age to just know who you are. And then they get thrown into all these situations of like, well, pick your gender. And it's like, what are you doing?
As you make that point, it's good to look at just 2 data points from the Centers for Disease Control's Biennial Youth Risk Behavior Survey. The most recent data, just looking at these 2 points, found that nearly 60% of high school girls today report experiencing persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness so deeply that they can't carry on normal life activities for at least 2 weeks. Something like close to 30% reported seriously considering attempting suicide. So this, it's not hard to understand why these poor students are so filled with angst and so depressed for many reasons, but the schools are making it worse. Mm-hmm. That's why I think the Chesterton schools are just absolutely a beacon of hope in this environment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that it's not just, trying to find this alternative way that will teach so even traditional subjects, because these aren't necessarily just traditional subjects. Like the Chesterton schools, and hopefully ones like them, are teaching the truth. Like if you leave out World War II, if you leave out the Roman Empire, you're missing some very foundational history for people to know their identity, and that's
absolutely,
that's really tough. And it's we live in such a both and culture right now, or a one or the other culture, and it's so difficult to have any kind of. Funny that one of their favorite terms is non-binary, and everything is polarized.
Well, here's an interesting result of all of this. Kristen Smith is a sociologist at Notre Dame who is one of the nation's best-known experts on emerging adults or basically adolescents. And he did a book fairly recently in which he surveyed young people, high school students, I believe, or maybe sort of older, sort of 18 to 21 or so. And he asked them on what grounds they make moral decisions. And he said that something like a third of these students literally could not understand that question. And they didn't understand the very notion of moral principles. And they would say things like, what are you talking about? Could you repeat yourself? I don't understand what you mean. And the point is that that the moral vocabulary and categories of thought that are foundational to deciding what a good life is and how you might approach trying to live it, those are literally being withheld from students today. And the schools, again, are certainly not providing, they're not filling this vacuum with anything that is helpful to these deeply confused young people.
Yeah. I recently heard about, it was probably in California, but the phenomenon of having to have litter boxes in classrooms for people who identify as cats or what have you.
It's certainly, to tell young people, when you have stolen their cultural patrimony, you've stolen the very notion of a tradition, and that's the context in which you can ask and answer questions about morality and the nature of the good life. You leave them with this giant hole, and then you ask them to construct their own identity. It's just a recipe for misery and disaster. And at a number of recent Chesterton galas here in the Twin Cities, I have heard young people stand up, the students who give the senior speeches, and talk about their own lives and how they came from a public school environment where they were drowning, and how Chesterton basically, transformed their lives and put them on a really a fruitful track that's going to hopefully, carry them through.
Beautiful. That's so encouraging. And it's wonderful that, again, I just want to make this connection explicit that G.K. Chesterton is like the founder of this whole movement, because so much of what he wrote, so much of what he said is so important to the philosophy that goes into this. There's one passage, I can't remember where it's from, where he says something like, my cousin might think he's the King of England, but he's not. And sometimes the best thing to do is just tell him, you're not the King of England. So he says these things in a funny way, but sometimes it's like, you just got to tell these people the truth, and nobody's doing it except us and a few other people. And it's so encouraging to hear these young people. I love hearing, they're almost like witness talks from these kids
true.
that graduate. It's so very encouraging. And I think by their fruits you'll know them, and that's the best thing that we have to show so far is these they're not even kids anymore, the men and women who have graduated.
Yes, and I think it is encouraging here to recognize that the classical school movement, of which Chesterton is absolutely a leader, is experiencing a renaissance. And one person whose work I've been following on this is a historian at Harvard whose name is James Hankins. And I wanted to read a little quote from something he wrote recently. He said, quote, "If the sound coming from district public schools is like the slosh of dirty water circling the drain, the sound of classical schools is of fresh springs bubbling up in the mountains. As the old Christian humanists of the Renaissance used to urge, ad fontes, back to the classics, back to the fountains and the sources of civilization." And that really is what Chesterton is doing, but it's going farther than that, because it's going to the ultimate foundation of our moral vision, which is, as Chesterton put it, the society of Christendom, the tradition of Christendom. It's the Catholic faith and the moral ground that it provides. And that one of my favorite quotes from Chesterton is, he said, "The one thing that is never taught by any chance in the atmosphere of public schools is this, that there is a whole truth of things, and that in knowing it and speaking it, we are happy." That is what I have seen at the Chesterton schools, and why I'm such a strong supporter.
Yeah, and just to contrast the stats you were reading about the hopelessness and the despair, the Chesterton Academies produce amazingly joyful young men and women, and the teachers. I've interviewed several of the teachers and the headmasters, and they are so joyful.
Yep.
It's just a whole different cultural environment, and a big part of it, I think, is that these kids are grounded in a strong foundation not a constantly changing series of fads, which I think is what we see in the public schools. But it's this strong foundation coming from a place, not just going to some nebulous place that we don't even know what it is.
Yes, exactly. And I think too, they are interested not only in themselves and constantly taking their own emotional temperature and asking, how do I feel about this today? They are learning to think. They are learning to argue persuasively. They have these tools that provide a sense of moral agency and confidence. And just think about the arts in particular at the Chesterton Academies. This is one of the things that most distinguishes them, I think, that both the music, the fine arts, and theater. And Eric Demuse, who's the headmaster of the Milwaukee Chesterton Academy, has talked about the role of arts of this kind, and he says they train students to focus their attention, and that learning how to focus your attention fruitfully is the sort of foundation of contemplation. And contemplation is essential to a good Christian life. And thinking about theater, you become confident. You can stand up and present yourself in a performative way in front of a group of people. It'll last the rest of your life. And of course, you'll have the language of Shakespeare, because you almost certainly have been in a Shakespeare play.
Who's also getting canceled, but...
Yes, oh, absolutely. But this will echo in the attic of your mind the rest of your life. All these are just such wonderful gifts to young people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen. And it's great to see so many of them even appreciate it at the time, which there are so many things I did not appreciate that happened to me, in my youth. Yeah, but it's beautiful. It's really amazing to see. And yeah,
one of the things I love, I don't know if this is done, I don't know if it's done at every Chesterton Academy, likely not, but here at the flagship school in the Twin Cities, one of the PE requirements, options, whatever it is swing dancing. So at the galas, there are always these wonderful choreographed performances of swing dancing, and the kids throw each other around, and the joy just lights up the whole room. That's typical, I think.
I live near Franciscan University. I've been to a couple of swing dances there. It is so much fun. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Especially if you're a female and you get a male partner who knows what he's doing, it is super fun.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I've seen
component.
It's a very important component. But you got to teach a guy he's a guy to make that happen.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just a wonderful, and it's funny because now it's essentially alternative education, and it's literally traditional education, but it's alternative at this point.
Yes.
Well, great. Well, I'm so glad for what you guys are doing at the center. I think that's really, really great. And trying to change things on a policy level too. I think that's so important. Because we know, grassroots is usually how things actually happen, but we also have to keep our politicians accountable for what they do and don't do.
Right.
And say they're going to do and then don't do.
And do a lot in the world of education. So
yeah. And education is where people are formed. It's where they become whoever they're going to be when it's their turn to lead the country. And that is a terrifying thought, if you know anything about modern education today. So
correct.
We really have to do our part to change things, whether it's on the policy level or supporting our local Chesterton Academy if we have one, or starting one, which may be in my future someday when my kids are at that
very
age.
Likely.
It could be. My oldest is 5, so we'll see what happens between now and then, but it's not going to get any better. That's for sure.
Well, it's amazing to see the parents all across the country driving this
Mm-hmm.
and coming to the Chesterton Schools Network and saying, what do you do and how can I be a part of it? It's a lot of work pulling together an institution like this, but the fruit is just so great. So I think more and more parents are understanding. As you say, Grettelyn, this is non-negotiable. I need to do what's best for my children, and it could very well be helping to found and support a school like this.
Yeah, and it's also encouraging because it is a lot of work, but at the same time, I think a lot of parents are coming to this particular model because they're so supported here.
Yes.
For as much work as it is, the Chesterton Schools Network provides all the framework that people will need, from like how to fundraise to like how to run an office, straight down to daily lesson plans. So it's really a comprehensive model that will make the most amount of work you could probably ever do the easiest it could possibly be. And I have seen the fruit of it again and again in many Chesterton academies in my time here. So thankful for it. Well, we're getting to time. This has been really fun. Any last thoughts that you want to share?
Just that I can definitely attest to how exciting and how much fun the Chesterton Conference is. It was so great after not attending because it was not here in the Twin Cities for a number of years to walk into that room and you think, oh my gosh, these are my peeps, these are like-minded people, and if they are at the conference, you can already assume so much about them and what they value. And I loved the range of topics that was covered. I loved all the liturgies that were part of this, and I loved the afterglow. The whiskey and cigars afterwards, and the feeling of true fellowship in an environment where people with our view of the world increasingly are face some hostility. It was just so life-giving. So I want to encourage everybody to be part of it.
And I want to also throw my backing that it's so open and friendly. It's like the most friendly crowd of people you're ever going to meet. And so even like I've had some people be like, I don't know much about Chesterton. Should I go? Yes, go. It's fun, first of all.
Right.
And you're going to make some really good friends. I mean, I literally met my mother-in-law there. Not at the time, obviously, but you don't know what's going to happen. You know.
Good points.
Yeah, but it's just a beautiful place, like you said, to meet like-minded people, but at the same time, very open people. And I've witnessed conversations between, Methodists and Catholics that go well because everybody's just trying to find the truth and help each other find the truth, and you're all sort of speaking the same language, and it just feels it feels good. It feels like I've heard it described as the best thing this side of heaven. So
I last year there was just a typical and really illuminating session. It was 30-something guys who were from very different backgrounds, including a former Muslim, one former atheist, and I think maybe 2 evangelicals or something, who were just talking about how their lives had changed because they read Chesterton, something by Chesterton. And these young men, at least from my perspective, these young men, and they spoke with such conviction, and they filled their talks with details, real life details that so many people, I think, could definitely connect with. And so if you walk in there knowing nothing about Chesterton, there's many opportunities like that to learn a bit in an extremely easy way that may not even involve reading books.
Right. It's It's great. But, if you want to buy books, there'll be tables and tables of
Oh,
them.
yes.
So. Well, thank you again so much, Katherine. This was really, really great. And thank you for coming on. It was great to talk to you.
Enjoyed it so much, Grettelyn.
Good. And I just want to one more time say, if you haven't registered for the conference, there's still time. You can go to chesterton.org/conference to find out more. We would just love to see you there. And if you can't come in person, there is a digital option. It's just going to be the best conference ever. So please come. Again, this is Grettelyn Darkey, your host for the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, UncommonSense. And remember, Chesterton is always better with friends. Talk to you next time.